I've hit the record, and the recording up until that point is totally. So, you know, if you were here for all that, that was what I call in the biz an exclusive. That was totally exclusive to you. So, so hey, you're like, man, we had a fun. We had a fun toasting to the 10 moment and everything, and that's
we should toast again.
toast twice.
Definitely.
Okay, another
Yeah.
ceremonial boop, ceremonial toast twice. Boop boop to the 10 to 10 more. There you
Mhm.
go. Thank you. All right. Hi everyone. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm doing this intro twice because my power went out in the middle of this interview, which was totally out of my control. We're talking to the amazing Spelling, whose new record, The Turning Wheel, is out now via Sacred Bones. I love the record. Hopefully you have the record too. There's some questions that were just sort of like lost in the ether and everything. We're not going back to that. Basically, I think at this point, what I want to dive into is we talked about some of the crowdfunding. We talked about, I guess, like, you know, the process of kind of demoing this project a little bit. Moving on from there to, I guess, like some of the meanings and philosophies and sentiments behind these tracks. I mean, I think as far as like a writer and a lyricist goes, you're pretty clear about like a lot of what drives you and you know, what's inspiring you on this LP. But you know, there are some ideas that I'm sort of curious about, like, you know, extending your thoughts on a little bit, specifically on like the title track, especially since, like, you know, with it being the title track, you sort of presume that the themes there kind of like guide a lot of what's going on with the LP. And it seems like you're, I guess, making a commentary on fighting, on weaponry, on, I guess, sort of like division amongst humanity itself. And, you know, sort of like going deeper into that, I guess, like, in your view, is such a thing in our current world even like possible? You know, is this song kind of coming from like an idealistic fantasy kind of place, or is this something that you sort of hope to see in your lifetime at some point?
Well, I think that's a huge question. And I think I ask a lot of questions with the music that I make, and I try to posit it that way. Yeah, The Turning Wheel is the title track of the album, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily feel like the sort of heart of the album, even though that the title is, you know, is the title track. But I think in my mind, that song speaks to these sort of tensions of like optimism in the world and being this like world citizen that sees a lot of the like real raw love and like true heart of and good in people, but also at tension is this like, what's the opposite of that, is just like this like defeatism, like this like that combat, the combat between those two, and that you know, wanting to persist and invest in community. And so I think like you can kind of see with the music video and like the visuals I wanted to create with that title track is kind of like very invested in the closest thing I can relate to, which is like the individuals that I know and cherish that make up my community and make up sort of like what keeps me optimistic about, you know, the future reality of our time. And so that song is about all of that. It's about like, you know, kind of wanting to live in that state of like just pure simplicity and enjoyment and like pleasure with the people that you love and cherish, and like, you know, like hold dear.
Mm.
And that's one element of the record, but I don't think of it as like the sort of thesis of the, or the like the whole of the album.
Mm.
um Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, in a way, I do think you make a inadvertently like a great point about the vibe of the record overall, and I think just on Optimism in general, because it is a very hopeful and optimistic record. And I'll admit, in the online space, I can be a kind of combative person. Especially when it comes to awful or very like destructive or racist points of view and that sort of thing. But often when I'm kind of dealing with other people who seem almost like they're opposite to me in terms of their point of view, I feel like I'm not even fighting against somebody a lot of the time who's like a literal Nazi, as much as I'm fighting against somebody who is like, yeah, I just don't care, or it doesn't really make a difference, this way or that way, or this guy's opinion or that guy's opinion. It sort of feels like, as you kind of said there a moment ago, like defeatism. It seems like there's just not as there's certainly like a very loud vocal minority of people who have very heinous points of view, but it seems like the even more prevailing thing beyond that is just there are a lot of people that just don't care and don't think that no matter which way sort of the knife cuts, shit's gonna suck anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for me to sort of single out the songs that I make, but that sort of on that thread of just optimism versus defeatism is that I want people to listen to the music and kind of just understand that like like time is moving through them and they're not just moving through time. Like you have the like ability to kind of access that like optimism within yourself. And I think making music has been the closest thing, has been the force that has helped me to understand that the most, is that like time moves through us, like we make that reality. And we have in each choice and decision that we make that ability to kind of like lay the stones down for like the foundation down for the future that we want to see. So I think, that that song is, a lot of the songs are about that, are about the tensions of like, like triumphing over sort of defeatism and pessimism, because, that lives within me. Absolutely. Like pessimism, defeatism, and just, like retreating into those into dark places, into like places of shadow that are, illusions towards, what you really want to achieve. And the whole process of making the album was kind of like that. It was like this like interaction with overcoming illusions within my personal like journey as an artist. Like we were talking about before, just like how do you get from one vision and circumstance to another, and like what materials does it take, and money is a real factor and circumstance is a real factor, but also just like the like scope of your like potential. Because I did crowdfund for this, which was amazing, to make the Turning Wheel happen. And I was really, really grateful and excited to see that so many people were down to support the making of this. And I couldn't have done it without them. But it just took like understanding that, those materials are already there. It just takes the investment, like it just takes people to kind of want it to happen, including myself.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. It's not something that, now that you put it that way, I've had to think about in that way, especially in the context of what we were just talking about, because you can't just exist through life not believing in the power of your own decisions and choices, or at least like in the power of your ability to do something, if like you put your mind to it, or else like what the hell is the point of anything? It's like you might as well just like not exist, because you're almost like relegating yourself to that position, just by virtue of kind of like accepting that defeat in a way. And, you don't get to that point where, as you were kind of saying before the power went out, where in 2017, you don't know what a DAW is. And then in 2021, you're coming out with this like immaculate, densely layered, heavily composed record with like 30 musicians on it. It's like you don't get from that point in that amount of years without believing in your ability to achieve something just by virtue of like trying it and, you know, not allowing something like circumstance. Obviously those things can get in the way and can make things, you know, hikes more difficult, but don't allow you to sort of like freeze you in a position where you're doing nothing.
Yes.
You know, there are a lot of tracks on this record that at first, I mean, it is like a very mystical record. And by virtue of that, there are, you know, aspects of it that going into it, I want to, like overthink off the bat. I was talking with a friend of mine, about like, you know, Emperor with Egg and everything. And, you know, I had all these thoughts about the song and I was like, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, oh, and I think this is this. And he's like, dude, it's about a fucking penguin. And I was like, you know, it was like, it honestly did not dawn on me like at first. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. No. And that doesn't mean that the song is, you know, void of meaning as a result of that. But, you know, so having said that, I guess, you know, I was curious about getting your thoughts on Boys at School, just because that's a track that personally, like, there are some clear feelings that are expressed on that song, but simultaneously, I didn't go too deeply into my thoughts on that one, you know, outside of the way it sounded, just because I didn't want to, like, over explain it or sort of like say it's something that it's not necessarily. I mean, I know a lot of music and art is just kind of open to interpretation anyway. So, you know, not knowing 100% isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that was kind of a curious track for me and one of the heaviest and most epic on the entire record too. So I was kind of curious about like what sort of very, you know, young formative experiences kind of informed that story and inspired your writing on that one.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're ready to just talk about the music. That's really nice. Um, I think that Boys at School is my favorite track on the album.
Hell yes.
And it's lived inside of me for a really long time because sort of the main melody that you hear, the like that the guitar does and the piano opens, you know, before the drums kick in, like that melody I kind of salvaged from some old tapes that I had like messed around with as a kid on my piano and I had tapes from. And so yeah, it's just survived a long time. And I think that's kind of just evidence of just like, yeah, the way that music is just such this mysterious force. But to me, that song represents kind of this feeling that I've always had. And I think that is inside of the music that like I've always sort of moved at a different momentum than my peers. Like the easiest way to put it is just I've been a late bloomer, someone that just, you know, has been very, very shy and has to constantly battle with social anxieties. And, you know, I was often the last one to like raise my hand or speak my opinion or the last one to date or, you know, just like I've been that wallflower. And I think at the same time, I've been this person that people are kind of like magnetized towards. And I never really understood it because I'm paralyzingly shy in social situations. Like, you know, like in all the like extracurricular activities I've done and work and these things where, you know, despite being a sort of wallflower, I've been sort of magnetized towards people who are really bold and there's been this attraction. And I think to this day, I struggle hardcore with that, being afraid of that kind of magnetism, being afraid of just like growing as a person and understanding myself. So the song is about that, and it's framed as, you know, the boys at school who kind of just represent they just represent this like overarching oppression of the like the true self, like of the like person that wants to come out, and you know, like meeting that person and dealing with them. So that song is about that, and you know, making it as an adult was really cathartic because it takes me back to that like high school self that has to relive that zone of just, you know, in high school and in you know, in middle school and grade school, there's just like this microscope on you about, you know, the way you dress, the way you like present yourself, the way you like talk, and those are all elements of just like discovering who you are and becoming confident. And I think that song is about sort of confronting that like that tension where, you know, I understand that now I understand that, you know, my introvertedness is the flip side of like my boldness. You know, it's like two sides of the same coin. And I think my music sort of like it wants to touch people who relate to that sort of tender and shy place, but and you know, a place of sort of alienation, and and I think often that the way that I write, there's multiple layers. So there's this layer of like, you know, like fuck the boys at school, you know, like fuck the patriarchy, like the oppression and all of that is very real and like understood. But there's also always this kind of like subversive layer that's like, you know, underneath it. What I tried to articulate.
I want to talk about a track also about seemingly a much different topic, and that's legacy. And you know, with this one, I feel like you can kind of take it a couple of different ways. I mean, on this track, it seems like primarily you could kind of take this song almost like as an extension of your past and sort of what you're kind of carrying on from that in the present with yourself and those who are probably related to you as well. But then there's also, you know, kind of an element of it from where you are now and sort of like, you know, where that goes into the future. And I guess, you know, off of this track, I wanted to ask you how much is that topic something that I guess you preoccupy yourself with, and I guess, you know, sort of like in what way does that kind of like occupy your mind? This idea of legacy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question also. So many good questions. Legacy is such a loaded word because when I think about legacy, I just think about, you know, so first of all, the song is sort of this is so corny, but just written from the perspective of just like birth. And I try to write from the perspective of like the unborn and entering into this world, totally from from oblivion. Like, you know, what is that experience like to just, you know, arrive in the conditions of your surroundings, and inherit so much. And that's universal to everybody. But I tried to just tap into that and think about legacy in that way. But yeah, to me, I think legacy is an important concept now as I create, because there are certain artists that, you know, I admire and I think about in this like sphere of influence as I make, and that I want to like be in communion with the music that I leave behind. And you know, like I think going back to what I was saying about boys at school is just sort of just discovering my voice through music has been the best sort of. I've always felt alien sort of to my body and to myself. You know, it's strange. It's hard to explain, but I felt strange inside my own body. So that feeling of alienation, and arriving at a song like Legacy, there's a similar tone, as what I'm trying to say is about, you know, um, how do you pick up the pieces of everything around you and like construct it into something meaningful and in your lifetime and your trajectory as an individual, and how do you do that with confidence? And so that's what that song's about. It's just about like meeting the pale light of day and just like accepting your particular like life, but taking charge of it at the same time. And I think that's what Legacy is about. It's legacy of the song, but just legacy in general is just, how do you do the most with that? Yeah.
I want to talk about two more major themes on the record. Excellent answer. Excellent answer. Fantastic.
I don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
We're talking about your new record.
Okay.
I want to talk about two more, I think, major and key themes on the record, and that's music and magic, which I don't know which one to start with first because I feel like they intersect. Maybe magic to sort of jump into that because I think that'll probably be the more fun topic, which again is often something that you're not afraid to reference in your music. Obviously, it comes pretty directly. And I in looking up stuff for this interview, I even saw that you were recently on a witch-centric podcast. And your last record was quite witchy as well, I guess you could say. To sort of like breach this topic, I guess in a very light way that probably everyone will be, find relatable who's listening to this. In what ways do you feel like music and magic intersect and complement each other?
In every single way.
Every single way.
In every single way. I've just always been drawn to the metaphysical as like my like meat of the music. And, I think music is science. It's just sort of this metaphor for the harmony of the universe. It's just like music to me is the core of exactly what it means to be human. It's exactly and also what makes you beyond human and makes you connect to the greater natural world. I don't know. And I want that human core to shine through and last and endure. But yeah, I think what was the original question?
I asked how sort of music and magic intersect. You said in every way.
Yeah.
You said in every way, which was the answer. But I guess kind of like getting more specifically into it. I mean, just looking into it a little bit for this conversation. I mean, there's so many different schools and concepts within that world. Just like between white and black and green magic and so on and so forth, just to name a couple of different things. I mean, there's, is there a certain piece of that world that you subscribe to, or is it just sort of like more general in terms of like your feelings toward, I guess, magic and the metaphysical?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. And I think I think of my music practice as my like spiritual practice. And that's how I treat it. And I think in this greater arc of just my journey as an individual, sort of what I was explaining about just like finding my voice and like understanding, like, because there's such a tension with me now where I'm making work and there's an expectation of like performance and that sort of version of the music, and there's such a resistance that I experience where I want to step away from the spotlight. Like I don't want to be on the stage. Like I don't want to be on the microphone even. So I think when I think about the spiritual factor behind the music, it's because it's, I'm learning to accept sort of my path, and that a, my music is from God. It's, it's a part of, to me, it is, the work of God. It's like, that is, I'm in service to that first. And that's something I'm still very much in the process of understanding, as I make. And being a person who, I was raised Catholic, and I was raised, in the church, and but also to a very open-minded family that said, like, trust your knowledge, and like understand, build your own independent mind. So my route through music has brought me the most close to what I've ever experienced as, reaching a sort of like religious practice or a spiritual practice. And so what I give out is, a part of magic. I think music is just pure magic. It's just, infinite, and I try to like live in that in between where I can pull from the sort of subconscious states into the cerebral states and kind of weave it into something material. And I think that's what magic is just, weaving those two states of the very cerebral and the logical and the understandable with the, just the mud and the like, yeah, the ephemerality of just notes and tones and all that. Yeah.
Well, I guess to kind of get into uh, the background of this music thing for you, if it's a topic that you're, not shy about getting into, you talked earlier about kind of the progress and knowledge that you needed to gain from 2017 to now to do what you're doing on this record. But like going back even before that, and even referencing like old demo tapes that you had, where you were writing melodies and that sort of thing, like where exactly is your personal musical background set? Are there elements or times where you're doing a lot of stuff self-taught, musical family lessons? I see that you play numerous instruments. What sort of like was your main axe back in the day that you sort of began learning on?
Yeah, I think it's so mysterious to me. And maybe I said this earlier, but I just feel as though I'm mysterious even to myself. Like I don't I don't really understand exactly how these influences kind of like culminated, but I think that yeah, I grew up in a household that my father is such a character and is such a charismatic person, who loves music, who loves all kinds of music. Just we would go to flea markets in the like Sacramento area, and he would always stop like any person vending music, anyone vending their own music. He would have to grab a copy of whatever they had and just like play it in the car on the way home. Like he was very much about like what's being made now, and he loves it. And he also loves the classics, like he loves Bob Marley, he loves the Beatles, he loves like Jimi Hendrix, like he loves all of that, the canon, but also so attuned to just the wiriness of what's being made right now. And he's also a person that loves to collect things.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of builds into my personality. Like I love to collect things. I love to collect instruments now. Like I have built up a pretty cool collection of instruments that I can't play, but that I love to have and see what they inspire. But yeah, just that like eclecticness. And then, so there was that influence, and also my mother's influence, just like pure, like, I don't even know what the word for it is, just like soul, like prog soul, like Stevie Wonder and those types of artists that were really pushing the dimensions of soul music. So I had, yeah, I had a lot of that in my household, and um, yeah.
Thank you for going into that. I just out of a curiosity, I have to ask you: do you watch anime?
No, not
No,
at all.
no anime, not at all. Okay, that's fine. That's
Not at
fine.
all.
Not
Should
not.
I?
No, no. I mean, no. You don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to. You
I'm
don't have
open
to.
to it. I'm so open to
You
it.
know, there are some cool, almost like kind of spooky or very kind of spiritual kind of animes out there that you might dig. Do you know what the Death Note is? No, no idea
What's
what
the
the
Death
Death Note
Note?
is. It's
No.
a really good series, but the whole series is kind of based upon this guy who comes across a book that whoever's name you write in it, they die. And and you could further write in the book how they die. That you can get really detailed with it. Like the show gets pretty creative in terms of like certain things that he does, and you know, he becomes a quote unquote killer who's being pursued by the police, and there's like this genius detective who's trying to hunt him down, which seems crazy in concept because how do you catch a guy who's just like killing people by writing their name in a book? But like it, you know, it actually happens, and it's very engaging. It's very engaging. It's very engaging, and it's very fun. It's very
Whoa.
entertaining, and if if the Death Note fell into your lap, would you use it? That's all I wanted to ask you. For some reason, there's just a vibe that I got off this record. I was just like, I wonder what she would do with the Death Note. Because often with my friends, like the Death Note becomes a point of discussion. So I'm like, I'm curious as to like, what would you do with the Death Note? Would you destroy it because it's too much power for a human to have, or would you use that motherfucker?
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. It reminds me of something. I would bring it, definitely. I wouldn't destroy it. Not so soon. Not so soon. I would need some time to think about that. But that's wild. Yeah. I think that I'm not afraid to use it,
Yeah.
but I don't.
I think you
Yeah.
should. I think you have an obligation to. What if there's a baby eater? What if there's a crazy raper or something? You'd have to. What if there's a whole army of murderers or something? It's you'd have to. You'd have to. In
Right.
my mind. In
Yeah.
my mind anyway. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Crazy scenarios, but like just in case, anything can happen. Yeah, I feel like the Death Note, you should probably keep it around just on the off chance, you know? Like the show kind of develops into a thing where the guy who has the Death Note gets really egotistical about it, and he's kind of like on a god trip, obviously, because you can kill anybody who you want. So it's like, you don't have to go down that road. You know, you don't, I feel like maybe if you're not an egotistical person, maybe you could use it for good. But I think that even if you are not an egotistical person, you might become one just with that power,
Yeah.
just by virtue of having that power. You probably start thinking like you're the best.
It would be in discreet hands with me, is all I can say. Where
Okay.
is this Death Note? Where is it? Where is
Um,
it now?
you know, I think. I think there'd be a lot more people dying if you know, and not just of a pandemic. If the Death Note was actually around, I think we'd know. I think we'd know. But to go on from here, I wanted to ask you. You were kind of referencing earlier, you know, this idea of kind of like growing, evolving. With what you've done on this record, you know, and with you know, the understanding that you're going to be kind of moving on to the next thing, like your process for the next album right now, do you kind of see yourself like at a point where you're seeking to kind of break this down and just like go into a totally different direction and create some kind of departure, or find a way to build on this and like somehow make it even larger, bigger, you know, something like that. You know, I mean, both artistic philosophies are valid, You know, some people kind of just like reinvent the wheel every time. Some people are just always constantly building.
Right. Yeah. I think I really feel as though I'm just getting started.
Hmm.
Um, I sort of see this trajectory that's like, um, I want to crystallize myself in this world of music making, and storytelling. It's very hard to put to words, but I think that, you know, I'm here I'm here to introduce people to new ideas, and I think that there's only the tip of the iceberg right now,
Hmm.
and you know, I think in certain ways, all I've known so far as being a musician and like being in this music industry is just sort of like coexisting with people and, you know,
Hmm.
not really like having a sort of life that's different, um, than, you know, more like celebrity music figures or anything like that. So I like being in that place, and I like being sort of in that place that's more slippery because I want to sort of represent and like give vocabulary to the sort of just the surreal materials of our time. I want to just be able to translate and receive, those ideas as an artist and produce them into music recordings. So when I think about the next phase, it was so exhausting to make this album, you know, like I was the only person really calling the shots and, you know, producing it. And it took so much, like, it really pushed me to the breaking point to have so many things like living inside my head, and kind of be the only one that makes the decisions around them. And so I think about, you know, what would it be like if I worked with a producer, like worked with someone else and like kind of like shared those responsibilities.
Hmm.
So I'm open to that in the future is sort of, you know, like, you know, this project was a lot of collaboration with the musicians, but with the production, literally only me, you know, like making those decisions. So that's something that I'm open to is kind of, um, opening up that intimacy with someone else and the production factor, in the future. And you know, there's some things on my mind. Like I got an acoustic guitar the other day from this guitar shop in Berkeley called Subway Guitars. It's so cool in there. It's like just hoarded with guitars and history. And I just like picked out this really cool one. And I can't play guitar really, but ta-da!
Honestly,
Yeah.
honestly, bar chords and open chords will get you a long way, and they're pretty easy to learn. So I wouldn't
Bar chords, yes.
I wouldn't sweat not knowing how to play guitar too much.
Yeah. So I just want to, you know, get more intimate with an instrument. I think
Hmm.
that's more in my future because as I made Turning Wheel, you know, like I don't play an instrument really. Like I write for all of the instruments that you hear, you know, like I would sing them with my voice and kind of just like map them out for the people that would play them. But, you know, and I can dabble in everything, but I want to spend more time with an instrument because, you know, just to like narrow in a little more,
Hmm.
with how like outward this last album had to be. So I think I look forward to that, like a little bit of a little more parameters.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so what you're saying is like, you know, you're musically speaking, you're a bit of a jack of all trades. You're doing a lot of different things. You're writing and, you know, you're playing, you're composing, but like you're not at the point where you're just like, bam, solo. You know, I'm just gonna like
Yeah.
bust out a wild, wicked piano solo.
I
I'm just
want
like,
that so badly. I want
okay.
that so badly. And I love that about so many artists that I like treasure and admire, you
Hmm.
know, like that capacity.
Well, okay. I mean, look, just as like honestly, if you put that same focus from the DAW to now, you know, that you did in those handful of years, I think from now to the next record, I mean, whatever you choose, I mean, make sure it's a cool instrument that you're like, whipping out a sick solo on. Okay. It's like,
Yeah.
don't master the accordion over the next 4 years. Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with the accordion. There's good stuff about the accordion, but like, I don't know if you want to be the master of it. You know what I mean?
I do.
Like
I do
pick,
though. I do want to be the master of the accordion. And I've been deep in the YouTube world of accordion tutorials.
there are some sick accordion players on TikTok too, who we've thrown it over to as well. So it's I don't hate on it. I don't hate on it. So, I think from now until next record in the same span of time, you could definitely get some solos going. You know,
You have to have the stature to be an
mm,
accordion player.
you
Not
do.
only you not only have to be buff, but you have to have the mental strength to be an
It is
accordion.
a very physically demanding instrument. Like between your pec muscles and your back muscles, just the constant pulling and pushing. It's a pretty
Yeah,
heavy, big, like nice accordions are heavy beasts too. So
right. It's like the accordion is just like become a lung like me,
mm.
and let's see what happens.
All right. I want to get a few viewer questions to you before we head out on account of the power going out a little bit earlier. Before I do that, though, I wanted to ask you really quickly about some of the visuals in the music video that you came out with recently, and just like some of the promotional art and everything. I'm very perplexed by like the face paint and stuff, especially just sort of like the decision to go with like a simple kind of circular color in like the middle of the face. I mean, the idea of like face paint and showmanship is like nothing new, but like sort of seeing you approach it in that way was almost just like a revolutionary, like aha kind of moment. It's like it's so simple and yet it stands out so much because it's like I haven't really seen anyone do that before, and I guess sort of like in your head, when exactly did you sort of like conceptualize that, and does it sort of like represent anything visually for you in terms of like the message that you're trying to get across?
I think that, well, with the Turning Wheel, the album, I kind of rested, like I embraced that more than in the past, and I have been, practicing tarot for a while, and that was a pretty like large factor towards the like songwriting and sort of the aesthetic that I was building with the album. And I think that what I love about tarot is that it's a language. It's not from the outside, from like the zero outside, maybe people see it as this like, pseudoscience thing of a way to predict the future. But I see it as this like projective tool to just, build your vocabulary and also like connect to just universal ideas. And so, yeah, studying tarot really like got me into that mode. And as well as just like my love for the idea of this theater and
Mm.
theater as being something that like is a ritual. It's something that, it's a performative, it's a it's a it's a performance, but it's also, like when you trace it back to its like indigenous roots, it's something that is like designed to kind of connect you to the divine and to like be an act that kind of like, produces telluric events or just like, makes things happen. And so I think of theater that way. And I think of like, the way of like presenting yourself as like one of these like universal or like archetypal figures in this like network of forces is what I was going for. And I think with the face paint, also it, there's like the influence of like David Bowie and like people who were in this like art rock realm of yeah, I think it just like showing that, you know, being a person that makes music is connected to a larger, just, you know, it's a larger force beyond yourself, beyond your ego. And I think that's kind of what the face paint does. It's like, you know, it's like a sort of uniform into the like greater network of like, yeah, the like legacy and history of music making and of theater, and like that connection there, like the connection between music and theater, which is so strong and what I like to like emphasize with what I make.
I mean, speaking of how theatrical the album is, I mean, is I guess what we would traditionally know as musical theater, you know, something that you were inspired by specifically in terms of like certain productions or songs on this record, or is like kind of adding theatrical elements to music in the abstract just more of kind of what drove you on this one?
Definitely not musical theater. I do love certain musical theater. Like I love The Wiz as a stage production. But yeah, I'm thinking more of like in the sort of abstract sense, like in the like philosophical sense, like, you know, the muses, the ancient Greek theater, like Egyptian rites of passage, like those sort of concepts of theater where it's like, we're in this world of chaos and how do we temper that like through measure and harmony and like and chance. And I think like that's what theater is. Like it's about like sort of, yeah, just um like yeah creating roles to like enact change. And I like theater in that more like abstract philosophical sense. But you know how it comes out in musical theater, I love that too. Like I'm a sucker for like, yeah, for musical theater also.
I wanted to ask you a question here from a viewer, Caspa. 1103, who's always one of our best viewers, and he submitted a question that I was trying to psych myself into remembering to ask you now, but I actually forgot. I mean, and he served me with a great reminder here. What exactly was kind of the impetus for sequencing the record in the way that you did, where you kind of have like this brighter first leg and things kind of get progressively darker and a little more synthetic, and obviously, you know, there's a little bit of a switch up in the last couple of tracks to kind of bring the album out, but there is kind of almost that like night and day separation slightly, you know, around the midpoint. And, you know, I guess kind of at what point in your mind conceptually for this project did that, you know, separation begin, and what does that separation represent?
It wasn't necessarily like like a fundamental part of it until I realized that I had these very different sounding songs. And so that kind of just all played into how I shaped the album and the concept. But to begin with, it's because, you know, just pushing myself as a songwriter with the above songs that you hear were kind of like, you know, I wrote those thinking about writing for someone else, like kind of like, if I were to write this song for someone else, what would it sound like? So there's this element with all of those where I was not necessarily thinking about them as spelling songs, and then the below songs were the ones I wrote first, that I were more familiar, more like similar to Maisie Fly maybe, and sort of their darker tone. But then, you know, I there is a very I'm very conscious about how I order the tracks, and I want them to feel like an experience that you're going through, that you can like kind of live in. So I ordered them very specifically, and you know, there are tracks that didn't make the album that I just took out because I wanted them to go feed off each other in a certain way as you move through them. So yeah, just like that idea of the light of day and the like joy of the above songs. And then as you like delve deeper into sort of the below tracks, I wanted to feel like this like submergence, that you and then, you know, with the last track, Sweet Talk, to kind of feel like you're like coming out the other side, like um you're going through a cycle. And the easiest term. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure how to pronounce this next user's name. Enolar Enola. Thank you very much for submitting this question and making this observation, which actually just like totally evaded me despite talking about this exact topic in an interview earlier this year. But to sort of dive into it, are you into St. Vincent's music at all? Annie Clark's music? Is that someone whose work you follow at all?
A little bit. And this is so corny, but as I was working on my vocals, I got a master class. I got a master class pass.
Like one of the online ones? Hey, they look good. They look good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually did Christina Aguilera's vocal training.
Oh, okay.
Certified. And then I watched St. Vincent's masterclass, which is amazing because I have like.
And that was a vocal one, or
about music making and producing. So recently I've gotten more into her discography and her work. And then I actually saw the interview that you did with her. And she reminds me a lot of a professor that I had at UC Berkeley, the way that she talks, and just like, she has a very like, just sort of like a familiar personality, and sort of, she's funny. And so I like her personality, and I love the way that it shines through the music. And so I started to check out her latest project, Daddy's Home.
Yeah. And
I love it. I think it's like, it's so explosive. I was not expecting it. I was definitely not expecting that. So yeah, and in her masterclass, she's like breaking down how she makes certain songs, and that was really cool to hear. I love to hear like how artists like, you know, what came first in the like makeup of a song. So I really liked her masterclass.
You know, not to nerd out too much on this, but there is a great podcast that when this topic comes up, it's always an instant recommend. But there's a great podcast called Song Exploder, where literally the concept of it is to have a particular songwriter on, be it like Rivers Cuomo of Weezer, or like Mike Hadrius of Perfume Genius, and, pick a particular song and just basically talk about the process of making that one single song. And sometimes in those conversations, you learn these large overarching sort of like tricks and tips and, weird idiosyncratic, processes that each songwriter goes through to make however they make their music. And I mean, if you want more insight onto that from a variety of different places, definitely check out that podcast, Song Exploder. But yeah, I mean, what this user brings up here is that record had, the new Annie Clark record had a moment on it with the track My Baby Wants a Baby, where just like, by chance, or by some kind of subconscious influence, the melody on that track just very closely represented the melody of that Sheena Easton song, Morning Train. And this user said that melody is also very closely to the melody that you sing on Always, which like, it seems like that's almost like just in the water or something. My baby takes the morning train. Like there is kind of a similarity now that you remind me of that or point that out, and it didn't dawn on me. And what's funny is like I love the fuck out of the melody on that song, on the Annie Clark song and your song. And I keep loving this melody in different contexts, but it never dawns on me that I'm hearing this like a similar melody or something it's like, man, this melody's really fucking good. You'd probably use it in 30 different songs. And it would never occur to me that I'm hearing something similar or something that's sort of like parallel in any way. And so I mean, funny. Is that also just like a by chance similarity there?
I don't know either of those references.
Well, there you go.
but there you go. But at the same time, I believe in that sort of kismet in the
Hmm.
water. That's like, the influence that builds up and then gets extracted at the same time. It's really fun to me to see those connections that pop up. So
No,
I'm
absolutely.
gonna look into that.
Speaking of, music nerddom, there's a lot of questions about that I've gotten submissions from over here. Questions about like, what do you think about the last 15 hours? What do you think about the 10, this, that, and the other thing? I guess what I should be asked as a result of this though is, are you ready for the memes? Are the memes too much? Like, should the memes be toned down a little bit?
I love memes. I don't think so. I think like this is memes are made for chaos. Like
Hmm.
what else are they there? What else are they there for? Like there's no point in trying to reel them in or tone them down. So let's go.
Let's fucking go. I mean, spoken like spoken exactly like the person that wrote the song Revolution. So appreciate that. I feel like, that track like requires a revisit, but kind of like, like a meme type epilogue to be sort of like included there to sort of like further that commentary for sure. Finally before we leave, are you at all in a mode where you're kind of like preparing to tour behind this record? And if so, like considering the grandiosity of it, like what is the live setting for this album going to look like? Especially since like some of your previous live shows have been like very stripped back and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I have the tendency to want to be stripped back
Mm.
and for that, to sort of like resist that. I don't consider myself an artist that really thrives off of touring or off of, delivering um, a live show. So when I think about touring, I'm in the midst of figuring that out and kind of trying to be authentic to where I see this project really thriving. And I think of it more in this realm of performance art. And I look to sort of like what I feel like there's sort of the core foundations to the music, which are, a mixture of musicians and visual and like cinema artists, like Ana Mendieta is somebody who's like really fundamental to the making of the turning wheel. And she, she's an artist that made like earth art and sort of defined, her philosophy of like making work that represents it's just in between so many different things. And I want to sort of deliver the like authenticness of the album that I feel like is between a lot of things and not like it's not like to me it's not music that is really meant to just be on a stage, like in a traditional sense, like in a venue. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around that and how I really want to deliver it. But um I have plans for giving it that, like, just satisfying that sort of like grand, like, let's bring the strings, let's bring the horns, let's do that in a sense, just because it would be so satisfying and nice to like put that on the stage. But I think in a sense of touring, I want to kind of go more into my like performance art influences and give some kind of give something different, give something that's more just less band and more performance art.
Uh, and finally, as maybe you're kind of transitioning into this mode where you're like preparing for the next record, you talked about sort of like how much this album kind of took out to you, especially, handling so much on the production side and kind of overseeing everything, calling all the shots. Do you see yourself in the future at a point where you are once again sort of like putting out calls for a ton of different musicians and going like 30 players, 35 players, 40 players, like in that realm? Or is that something that you're hoping to streamline the next time around? Are there going to be auditions? Like, can the people in chat come down and try out with their best accordion solo? And just like, I heard you talking about accordion in the interview. If you want accordion, I'm your guy, I'm your girl. Get me on the record.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say. I think at this stage, it changes from day to day. Like from at one, right before this interview, I was kind of like, I'm so done with I'm done with
this shit. After I talk to Anthony, I'm just finished. I can't take this shit anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that sometimes where, like as soon as I'm like through this threshold of output, like I don't know what's next, but I need a big reset to figure it out. The impulse right now is to like really shrink, but it's hard to predict where that'll go because I also have this like I've started to write some new songs, which is good because, these songs from the Turning Mill were done about 6 months ago, and I haven't written anything since then. But I started to I woke up with a song in my head from a dream this morning, and I I have a collection of voice memos that are like when I wake up and like have a song in mind. And a lot of times my battery is hanging on a prayer from my cell phone, like I don't pay good attention to that. So, I'm at like 1% and I wake up and then I run down to the charger so I can record something. And then I go back to bed and then I listen to it later and I'm like, okay, maybe I can make something from that later. But at least that's starting to happen again.
Okay.
Which is a good sign. So, the wheels are moving.
The wheels are turning.
The wheels are turning.
And with that, thank you for making this your last interview. We greatly appreciate you coming through, and it's been great. It's been fantastic. And any parting words for the audience?
Well, yes. Thank you so much, everyone. We've endured the storm, the power outage. And yeah, I love everybody. Please take care and stay grounded and, do your thing. Take risks. Be happy. Go out there.
Christia Cabral, thank you very much for coming through, and amazing spelling. Fantastic.